Monster Hunter Wilds has now entered the part of its life cycle where its success is so foreign to Western games journalists, they're now attempting to decipher how could a game like this sell as much as it did without being anything like a Western game in terms of its story design and more. These journalists, as I'll show you, are perplexed, as if they've been tasked with deciphering the Da Vinci Code when in reality, the answer is simple, but these types are unwilling to say the quiet parts out loud. This brings me to this article from thegamer.com, which is hilariously titled, "Why Isn't Monster Hunter Wilds Flopping Like Dragon Age the Veilguard?" Oh boy, how much time do you got? Cause this might take a second. Yeah, that title straight up reads like a parody to anybody who's been keeping up with this sort of stuff for a while now. How could a game about monster hunting be selling so well when this other game that rejected its identity and ruined itself did so poorly in comparison? It's so perplexing, isn't it, thegamer.com? Well, let me spell it out for you, but let's also go through this article and others. They start off the article by saying Monster Hunter Wilds is the latest entry in a long-running RPG series. It's the most approachable entry in the franchise yet. It may have lost some of its identity in the process of sanding down some of its more unique features, but the developers made that sacrifice in hopes of reaching a bigger audience. They then follow this up with another paragraph about Veilguard, which, as you can see on screen, they just copy and pasted the same paragraph I just read, but they replaced Wilds with Veilguard. And they are right here, credit where it's due. Both games do from the outset are technically in a similar camp. Both Wilds and Veilguard were games in long-running franchises that looked to simplify their mechanics to attract new players. This is 100% true, but there's a caveat here that is clearly not being addressed anywhere in this article. Look, I beat both of these games. Well, in Wild's case, I beat the main story and I'm in the post-story now. But in Veilguard's case, the game starts off with very, very basic RPG mechanics that, let's be real, even a child could understand. There is nothing left to think about. Even the armor customization is simplified to such a degree that you at times feel more like a toddler that is putting shapes into similar shape-size holes than an adult who's playing a rated M for mature video game. The problem with Veilguard's mechanics, however, are that they never actually evolve from, say, hour 1 versus hour 50. What you see is quite literally what you're going to get with Veilguard, besides some basic levels of customization that, like I said, are very simple at best. Generally speaking, you just fight, level up, pick a skill on the big skill tree. That's kind of like Final Fantasy X Sphere Grid, sort of, but not as interesting, and then that's sort of it. You also can't even control your teammates either. Their abilities are just mapped to each button press, and they aren't even able to fall in combat either. Sure, Veilguard was clearly trying to be more like Mass Effect in this way. However, even in Mass Effect's case, you would have to keep tabs on your allies because they could fall in combat and then you would need to revive them and such. And if you played those games, you would know what I'm talking about. But in Veilguard, everything is so automated. None of this matters compared to previous games. There's no party management needed here. Just keep your rook character alive and then your pawns will kind of just exist as just background noise that you once in a while will tell to do something. In Wild's case, it's the exact opposite. What you see and get from the first hour is nothing like hour 30 or 50. Sure, the game starts off simple. You save some kid that's crying on a not chocobo creature from some sand monsters, and then you are then given the choice to pick your starter weapon. You're given the basic gist of whatever weapon you've chosen, but it's very surface level. You don't really need to know the mechanics much to survive the next fight against the big fat frog guy you're about to fight, because he's easy obviously. It's the beginning of the game. But as you play, you start to learn that, oh wow, this weapon that I chose, which I usually use the switch axe, longsword, or charge blade, as you're likely seeing from all the footage of me playing this game here on screen, and then these weapons and many, many more, they can all alter and change and do weird things that you weren't really told about right away. For an example, right, take the longsword, probably one of the more simple weapons on the surface, but it's still deadly and very effective. It's just reducing everything around you to nothingness. You likely start by mashing triangle. Then you realize when you hit R2, you get a new combo set. But then you realize as you attack with R2, it eventually turns your yellow blade icon on the left here into a red blade. This means now that your longsword has entered super freak mode and it's ready to get nasty. Now you're doing all kinds of new moves. and you're slicing up dudes like your Virgil from Devil May Cry or Puss in Boots in the modern classic Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. By the way, that's a great movie. Death is so cool in that. Anyway, then you'll find out if you hit R2 and triangle, that you can now dash and stab a monster and then fly up into the air and come crashing down on them. But then if you hit another button, then you turn into Sephiroth and slice and dice the monster like crazy. There's more attacks, sure, like you can put your sword in your sheath and then shoot it out and all these other kinds of things, but you get the point. Which is that this is one of 14 weapons that are available in Wilds. This doesn't even cover the different effects or the elements or anything else that these weapons can have. Meaning, depending on the monster you're facing, you're going to choose a different weapon to fight them. You're going to face some kind of ice-type monster maybe, probably a good idea to have fire on your weapon. The Charge Blade, for example, as the name implies, you can charge it up and then you can switch the weapon into this crazy axe form that incorporates the shield into the sword that you were just using. It's super badass looking. And now you can do these big elemental damage sweeping smash attacks and kill beasts even faster. The point I'm making here is that the depths of Monster Hunter in general, yes, it starts off very easy and simple on the surface by design. But like a good lasagna, there's plenty to find under the first or even second layer as you bite into it. This means that the game never actually gets stale technically, because unless you have become God with all the weapons, and somehow mastered them all and carved enough beasties to start your own butcher shop, you're never really done with these sorts of games. Backflipping over to Veilguard, what you see is quite literally what you're going to get. The weapon combos never really expand past what you get a few hours in versus the end of the game. You kinda just keep doing the same combos the same way with no real variety besides your other weapon, which is tied to your class and can't be changed, which is also not into depth, and that's pretty much it. So while yes, both games are indeed simple on the surface, Veilguard is more so as wide as a lake and as deep as a puddle, whereas Wilds is as wide as an ocean and as deep as the Mariana Trench's depths. I haven't even brought up all the different ammo types, or the traps and how those work, or the bombs, or how you can use meat to lure monsters. Not to mention using the environment to just absolutely skull crush your beastie foes like, look at this dude. I'm fighting this big ass ice dragon, which is already really cool, but then look at what I can do here. I'm pulling down debris onto the head of this thing and then drowning it in industrial metal. It's so badass. And no, you can't do anything like that in Veilguard, and that's the point. This kind of brings me to compare even Wild with another newish game in the form of Avowed. People complained like crazy how Avowed's world was so unreactive. Nobody moves in the towns. You can't really steal things technically like you can say in other games like Oblivion or even Kingdom Come, but Veilguard is a lot like Avowed. It's a very static world that you can inhabit. The towns especially, you can just run around in, and besides the odd wooden blockage on a door, or you can smash open I guess, or a door you can just open by pressing a button, the reactivity in Veilguard is basic at best. Yet in Monster Hunter, you can parry monsters and just send them flying. Or you can have another monster show up and start beating the other monster you're currently fighting like it just caught that other monster sleeping with its wife or something, while it was at monster work at its monster job. You can pick up all kinds of weapons off the floor too. And all these things that you find in the environment, they all do unique things too, like there's different ammo types. You can pull bugs off walls to heal you. You can even pull a flash bug to just explode and then blind everyone, like they're in that one episode of iCarly. Look, comparing Monster Hunter to Veilguard is like comparing a 1 in 300 Swiss Army knife thing to a Fisher-Price plastic chicken nugget. The comparison is so vastly in different levels of quality that it's incredible and not even really in the same ballpark. Wild sold 8 million in 3 days. The highest selling Dragon Age, which is Inquisition in case you didn't know, sold 12 million units. But it got to that number over 5 or so years in total. Again, Wild sold pretty much 66% of Inquisition's lifetime sales in its opening weekend. That's nuts, dude. Comparing that to Veilguard, the gamer tries to say that the game had the biggest launch on PC for Steam single player wise from specifically BioWare and EA, but it's not really reliable, since Veilguard was the only first day one release from BioWare as a studio, launching their game on Steam alongside everything else. Inquisition, for an example, took years before it came to Steam. Same with other games that BioWare has made in the past. So yeah, they would have their biggest single player release on Steam with Veilguard, because it was their first day one release ever on that platform. But even then, the gamer can't cope, where they say this, but it seems like that strong debut was largely caused by the Dragon Age faithful showing up in huge numbers, on the strength of love for the series and strong reviews. Once players actually got their hands on the game though, the tides quickly turned and Veilguard was unable to break out into the mainstream. This is journalese gobbledygook, for the game was ass once people actually played it, and the more that they played it, the more they realized that BioWare completely bamboozled them and ruined one of gaming's favorite RPG franchises. The Gamer copes harder with Veilguard, where they then say this: both games were attempting to grow beyond their established fan bases to reach a more mainstream audience, and delivered a somewhat watered-down experience. So why did the strategy work so well for Monster Hunter and so poorly for Dragon Age? The most straightforward answer is that Monster Hunter had a lot more rough edges to sand off. It's a series that is known for its complex combat, esoteric multiplayer, and interlocking systems that aren't always well tutorialized. Monster Hunter Wilds still delivered on much of what the series is known for. As someone who has played a couple dozen hours of the previous games, but never dove especially deep, Wilds is very recognizable as Monster Hunter. The core loop is still there, it's just contextualized a bit differently thanks to this entry's greater emphasis on story and characters. Killing monsters, harvesting their parts, turning them into gear, that's all still here, but with a better on-ramp, lower difficulty, and more narrative hooks. Wow, good on you, thegamer.com. Yes, Wilds did and sold well, cause like you just said, the game was still undeniably Monster Hunter through and through. And once you beat the main story, or I guess up until the credits roll, because it does keep going, but once you get there, the game's difficulty rightfully starts shooting up in terms of monster strength and so on. So yes, Capcom did make the game easier from the get-go, sure, and while I'm not in the endgame yet, mostly because I'm currently reviewing AI Limit myself, which comes out later this month, so once I'm done with that, I'll come back to Wilds. But it's clear that the gamble, so to speak, that Capcom did here is paying off. They made the game's opening 10 to 20 hours easier, sure, but also very engaging, and the story for this game, which if you've played it, Wilds, you know, they introduced some pretty crazy concepts to this world that are actually genius the more you think about it. But what they've done with Wilds is a great masterstroke in both bringing in the casual crowd while ensuring once those hardcore players get to the end game, they got all the stuff that they need too. In Veilguard's case, they just gave nobody what they wanted. It's like one side wanted pizza, the other wanted chicken wings, and then BioWare just gave both sides boiled cabbage. That doesn't even cover how poorly the story was told in Veilguard and how the lore implications of how they ruined the world of Thetis. I mean, even the Gamer kinda self-owns their own article here where they say Veilguard was streamlined in every way. It traded in Inquisition's open world for a level-based structure, and the levels were hyper-linear, leaving little room for exploration. The dialogue choices were superficial, allowing for little real roleplay. The combat was fun, but simple action RPG fare. The series' lore was pared back or ignored, and the companions were largely uninteresting. The game began life as a live service game, and it shows in the lack of detail and depth given to the world. It feels like a place you would inhabit with 100 other players, not like it was designed to react to your actions. Wow, your entire article could have just been that, The Gamer. You perfectly explained why Veilguard sucked. And that hyper-linear structure didn't help things either, and in Wild's case, some argue that it's also not a true open world. But all I gotta say is ride your not chocobo monster and just go climb some of the vines you can see or whatever else, and you'll see just how many different paths there are. And actually how seamless it all is. On PS5, by the way, I don't play on PC. But you'll see how the level design has clearly made it dynamic and how you can hunt and find monsters. And comparing Wilds to Veilguard is the true Atom Bomb versus Coughing Baby equivalent. These games are on an entirely different levels of quality, polish, and content, not to mention, you likely know that Veilguard is, as of this video going live anyways, is also a part of the PlayStation Plus offerings for March. Yes, a whole 6 months after its initial release, and EA is giving the game to PS Plus subscribers already. But it's not looking good for BioWare. This is from PlayStation Lifestyle. Looks like Dragon Age The Veilguard isn't a big hit as PS Plus freebie. So PlayStation Lifestyle went on psnprofiles.com and searched for Veilguard to see how many new players there were from when Veilguard was given for free via PS Plus. Since its release on PlayStation Plus, Veilguard has added a total of new players of just 1,565 as of the game being out on PS Plus.
That's right. Cry.
And if you Google it, PS Plus in general has about 47 million subscribers. So that means Veilguard has been actually played by PlayStation Plus players after being given it for free basically by a fraction. A fraction, dude. Of not even a single % of the entire player base that PS Plus users inhabit. So not even when the game is technically free, sort of, is the game being played by players. You know how cooked and bad you gotta be that not even the cheapest players who literally buy nothing but play free games want to play your game? That is diabolical, dude. Horrendously down bad BioWare is with Veilguard. But that's what happens when you make a game for nobody but your Discord chat. But I think the reason why these journalists can't cope with how Wilds has done as well as it has is because they're still too locked in with that Western mindset. Notice how nowhere in anything that I showed from this gamer's article did they bring up the fact that Veilguard is ham-fisted gender nonsense and political messaging all over. It's like they know why it failed, but they can't bring themselves to say exactly why, because if they do, they'll be torn apart by their colleagues. So instead, they have to essentially speak around the corpse of the thing they're talking about and having to ignore the obvious fact that the reason why the game died in the first place. Wilds has women in it, and I know some people have tried to paint the picture that the game is woke, but it isn't. But the difference is that Wilds never attacks you for who you are, or talks down to you, tries to say this political thing is better than this. None of that happens. Whereas Veilguard can't help but make every single villain, and no, I'm not joking, every one of them is either a white man or woman. The only time an organization is controlled by a white man in Veilguard is the Grey Wardens. And they go out of their way to exhausting degrees to ensure that you're shown just how poorly ran that group is, and then how much better it's ran once a woman is in charge. The whole game is eye-roll worthy, so it's no surprise it had nowhere near the same level of success as Wilds did. And whereas Veilguard is already being thrown onto other services like a sack of meat, Capcom is rising. This is from VideoGameNews.com. Monster Hunter's series producer is being put in charge of all of Capcom's development divisions. Ryozo Tsuchimoto, the producer of Monster Hunter, will be made the chief product officer of Capcom. And I mean, yeah, he's been shipping hit after hit with Monster Hunter, so that makes a lot of sense. This means that Ryozo will be in charge of every single game coming from Capcom from a video game release perspective. He will not, however, be in charge of the pachinko business that Capcom has over there that's being overseen by another chief product officer instead. But this just means that the guy who has been running Monster Hunter will now be in charge of ensuring that every product that comes out from Capcom is good. However, criticism where it is needed, Wilds still hasn't run well on PC yet. And I do think that Capcom needs to ensure that they focus on PC optimization going forward for sure in the future. That has to be a priority. Because PC players deserve better. While yes, Capcom games do run fine on PS5, it's a shame what's become technically passable for purchase on PC in comparison. And in case you forgot or didn't watch my other Monster Hunter content, I brought up a concept in those other videos called brain drain. To refresh, basically, it's a term that means when highly skilled individuals either leave studios or the industry altogether, and these devs are all wealths of knowledge without sharing or ensuring that knowledge is spread across to other devs in the industry once they leave. Hence, once they're gone, and then they take all their talent with them. Mostly this happens in the West, because Western companies vastly do not seem to care as much about their staff as opposed to Eastern ones. To prove a point here, this Ryozo of Capcom, who's now in charge of everything, he graduated from university back in Japan in 1996. And then he started working for Capcom right out of university when he graduated up until this very day. He's been there this entire time. That guy has been with Capcom for almost as long as I've been alive pretty much, and that's what I mean. Ryozo's talent has been cultivated by Capcom for decades, and it shows. Then you can take BioWare for example, and how many of their pioneers who helped shape not just BioWare, but the games industry have left that studio in the years since. Gone are Casey Hudson of Mass Effect fame, or Mike Laidlaw, who helped create the best Dragon Age games. All that remains are these activists and people who are nowhere near what BioWare used to employ. And the brain drain, so to speak, at BioWare is clearly evident when you compare Veilguard to their previous games. And this is a stark contrast to how this Ryozo has been treated and continues to work at Capcom in comparison. You don't get to 8 million units sold in 3 days on a whim. Those numbers and that level of trust from consumers comes from years upon years of trust being built through pattern recognition. So when thegamer.com can't fathom and wonders, how could Wilds do what Veilguard or other Western games couldn't? They just fail to understand how much game development has changed in the West because they no longer seem to care about their devs, and it shows in their games. And when you don't care about your devs or their well-being and you're willing to throw them away like used tissue paper at a moment's notice, is it any wonder why the games coming from these studios are of lesser quality in comparison to what they've made in the past? Relationships, as we all know, are built on trust, while Western game developer trust seems to be built on ensuring that your stool that you're standing on doesn't get kicked every single day by someone, resulting in you hanging yourself. So the West can, cry all they want, claim gamers are racist bigots, or whatever other convenient reasons are leading them to trying to justify why this game failed or that game then. But ultimately, it comes down to the fact that these games and their franchises are not being shepherded by people who know the source material or what makes those franchises important in the first place. And if anyone who was involved with previous Dragon Age games worked on Veilguard, the reception to that game proved that they have lost their own personal connections to that franchise long ago. And this will just keep happening. Look at Iron Galaxy, a Western game development studio that made games like Extinction or Rumbleverse and the upcoming Tony Hawk 3 and 4 remaster games. And they've laid off a lot of employees, and gee, I wonder why, when a lot of the games they've made besides their ports have all been commercial failures. As SmashJT shared some screenshots on Twitter as it reads here, Iron Galaxy names Regis Marshall DI Program Lead. Killer Instinct Studio taps Progressive Insurance LGBTQ+ Employee Group Ambassador to lead its diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And here's what this DI person had to say about working at Iron Galaxy, this Western studio. As a black queer woman, I understand how intersecting identities can create workplace barriers preventing upward mobility, Marshall said. By addressing pay inequity, retention of diverse employees, and employee support, and exploring potential partnerships and collaborations with technology and gaming social impact organizations, I look forward to continuing to build an environment where everyone truly feels valued. Notice how nothing they said there was about making cool games. It's just social impact, DI slop, and all of the usual nonsense we keep hearing about. And as you can see here, Iron Galaxy since then has let go of 66 employees. I guess those games that were pushing social impact, they didn't work, did they, as they intended? Gee, I wonder why. And what has happened to Iron Galaxy is exactly what has happened with BioWare. These Western devs are not making games first, but propaganda. And it's not working clearly. And it's pathetic to see, honestly, so many of these studios get roped into this nonsense by these woke grifter types. And as long as these studios continue down this mentality, the same outcomes will keep happening in a cycle until they all just fall apart due to their own hubris. And it's not just brain drain, it's the complete and utter lack of any respect for the players who help support franchises like Dragon Age to continue down like this. And I can only hope that one day someone who actually cares gets a hold of Dragon Age's IP's rights. Maybe one day they can usher in a new era, but until then, what has happened with Monster Hunter here will just keep happening in the future, and it's no one's fault but the West and how they treat not only their customers, but their developers as well. Thank you for watching, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.